Now, this creates a stronger motivation for the company to be involved. It's stronger because now, besides money, you can have employee volunteering, you can have executive engagement, and it shifts beyond just charity support. And it can also evolve as the company evolves. From an NPO point of view, it's also a much more positive thing, because when the economy turns bad, the first thing that's cut is the charity. But the more activities are related to what the business does, the more likely they will be maintained. Now, the next trend in sort of corporate citizenship is to go even beyond the core competencies, to focus on relationships that mutually support the business goals of the company as well as the mission goals of the NPO. Now, this doesn't mean that the NPOs become salesmen for your product, but it means perhaps working together to develop products. For instance, you see this often in the bottom of the pyramid type of activities, to work together to develop products for communities in developing countries, and working with NPOs who share a vision of improving the economic development of those areas. And that's kind of the next generation. So let's look at how NPOs have evolved. The NPOs around the world have usually started out as well-intentioned, passionate people who want to make the world a better place to live. And sometimes they don't know specifically what they want to do, but they want to do something to make a difference. And so I call that the first phase. That's kind of the heart phase. I want to do something from the heart. The next phase is when the NPO looks around and finds a specific issue, focuses its mission, and gets a better sense of what it wants to do. That's the I's. They're still going to ask anybody to support them who they can, but at least they've looked around and they've got a better sense of what they're doing. Now, the next phase is what I call the brain phase. That's where the NPOs not only focus their mission, but they also think more strategically about their relationships. They don't just ask anybody for support, but they ask people who are more likely in line with them to support them. So that's the brain phase. And the final step is the ears. This is where the NPO actually listens to the needs and the interests and the challenges that their partners have as well, whether they're government partners or corporate partners, and create a deeper relationship. Now, you might think it odd that I put ears after brain. I mean, isn't brain the highest thing? But think about it. You probably know lots of very smart people, but how many people do you know who are really good listeners? That's the most rare talent of all. So then we'll turn to the government evolution. And it's very hard to generalize about governments. But when you think about government evolution with their relationship with NPOs, I think around the world you can kind of say generally that it's happened like this. It started out with the idea that these organizations are perhaps the enemy. So the best thing to do is just avoid them. And then the next step is you realize as a government official, these guys are good low-cost labor. I can use them, I can contract with them very cheap to help provide my government services. So then you become a contractor relationship, and you tell them what to do. The final phase is the partner phase, where governments are actually willing to listen to NPOs, and particularly to the NPO ideas on the development and delivery of those public services, and on the creation of public policy to actually support those goals. So, given all those trends, where do we stand? I mean, as you can imagine, if you put all these arrows together, the opportunities for partnering work best when everybody is at sort of the partnering end of the spectrum. But timing is seldom that perfect. So where do we stand right now? Well, I'll take the case of the US. It's very hard to generalize. There's more than 1.4 million registered NGOs in the United States. And there's, hundreds of thousands of corporations, which range from, the really small family companies to the big multinationals. And of course, there's many, many levels of government. But if I had to generalize, I'd say most companies are in the area of aligning now with their core competencies. Random philanthropy doesn't happen that much anymore. I'd say most US NGOs are pretty sophisticated in terms of their focus, and they also conduct, donor research to help focus their requests. This is in part because to survive, you have to survive in the market. So like any good organization, you need market research. And while governments, I think, still largely use community groups to provide services, they're much closer to the realm of partnering with them than they ever have been before. I mean, there's some NPOs that are incredibly influential on Capitol Hill in terms of both affecting, spending and affecting public policy. So now the question is, what about Japan? I should ask all of you where to put the arrows on here. I mean, it's very hard to generalize, but if I had to say, I'll say this just to get the conversation going. I think to the extent that most companies have, if any company has a relationship with an NPO, it's still very much in the charity mode. It's a new phenomenon, so it hasn't had time to evolve much further. Regarding NPOs in Japan, I'm glad to see that so many of the ones that are surviving have improved their mission focus over the last decade. I used to meet NPOs here who would say, my mission is to create a sustainable society. Very beautiful, but I don't know what it means. That has changed. People, I think, now are much better at that. But I think most NPOs here are unfortunately still left with the notion of you'll ask anybody for support because there's just so little support out there. Governments, well, I've met very few Japanese NPOs that say that they have a regular dialogue with government. And if they do have a regular dialogue with government, it's only about funding. And it's about, did you submit the receipts and did you submit the reports? And it's not about the broader public policy and about how that service was delivered. So I'd say it's moved out of the enemy box, but it's still got a ways to go to get to the partnership end of the spectrum. So I want to wrap this up so we can have a good discussion. So I'm going to go back to where we began, which is why learn about partnerships? And I think for those of you from government, this is a very good quote. The days of the all-purpose authority that planned and delivered everything are gone. It is in partnership with other public agencies, with private companies, community groups, and voluntary organizations that local government's future lies. So if you're from government, why partnerships? It's where the future is. If you're from a corporation, it's because it's the next evolutionary phase that we talked about on those arrows. If you're a student, well, as the forms of collaboration increase in frequency and in scope, there's a growing need for people to actually manage these partnerships and create them and evaluate them. And this has created a whole new field of jobs called partnership brokers. And that might give you another career option to think about. And academics, well, if you're an academic, there's a growing body of literature on this type of partnership. And that gives you some basis for, for research. However, most of the literature is by Western academics on Western examples. So there's a huge opportunity for Japanese academics to contribute to this field, both in longitudinal and comparative terms. And for NPOs, the reason why is all of the above, because this is the ecosystem that you are working in. So with that, I want to thank you for listening to me, and I want to thank Imai-san for arranging this, and Ogawa-san and Yabe-san for the excellent presentation. And I look forward to having a discussion with you now for the rest of the period. Thank you very much.